Hi everybody, my name is John and I'm about to start a series of lectures on the 12 steps of recovery. Um, but today what I want to do with you is a primer on those 12 steps. Kind of like a tutorial how to get the most out of the 12 steps and doing written step work. I just off the bat want to say I'm not speaking on anybody's behalf. I'm not speaking on behalf of AA or NA or any of the A's or anybody else. I'm speaking from my personal experience with the 12 steps, having done my own step work, um, practicing my own 12-step program, and also taking many men and women over the last 15 years through parts of the 12-step recovery program. So it's coming from a personal understanding, a personal place. Um, Also, just want to go off the bat and just put a little disclaimer in there that some of my interpretation might be controversial, especially if might come across as controversial, especially if you've been spending a lot of time in AA, NA, or you've been in a disease model treatment center. Take it or leave it. It's up to you. I will highlight when I feel like I'm being a bit controversial to the disease concept. Please just take it as my interpretation, as my opinion, not the 11th commandment carved in stone. What I've found when doing step work with people is they don't understand the purpose of step work. And in my observation, I feel when people don't understand the purpose or the objective of the exercise, they often don't get the exercise. They don't understand how to approach the questions. And if you don't understand the purpose and the objective of step work, more often than not, that's going to translate into a academic and intellectual translation and understanding of the step work. And step work's not trying to access this. So let me suggest to you, the sole purpose of step work is to illuminate. That begs the question, what is it illuminating? It's illuminating what's in there. Essentially shame. All that toxic shame, all that negativity, all that self-loathing, all of that fear and regret and guilt and lives in there in the dark, and it just sits and festers. And it's one of our biggest using engines. So step work has been designed by some very insightful people to go in there and drag that stuff out into the light. You'll hear the saying, shame dies in exposure. And in my experience, that's true. Whatever you're willing to face and embrace about yourself, you can change. And the flip side of that, whatever you're not willing to get honest about, is going to keep you sick. The writers of the big book of AA have got a quote. They say in there, you're only as sick as your secrets. And I have to say, that's been empirically tested and found to be very true, not just by me, but by everybody else that has successfully participated and practiced the 12 steps in their lives. Okay? So it's going after what's in there rather than what's in here. My guess is that you're probably a frustrated genius like me, like everybody else I've worked with. So we don't have a problem with our academia or our intelligence. It's a spiritual dynamic, or as the old timers would call it, a spiritual malady. The objective of step work is ownership. And you saw on the previous slide the words extreme ownership. Excuse me. The objective of step work is to help you start taking responsibility for where you are, for how you got there. It's not an exercise to help you to place blame or responsibility anywhere else. Your decision making, your worldview, your belief system, your behavior, your arrogance, your unwillingness to listen, or to look at what people have been trying to show you or tell you maybe for a few years has brought you this far. Okay? The objective of step work is to help you take ownership. And I'm going to expound on that on the next slide. Courage and self-honesty are critical, absolutely critical. And I would wager that there's already a lot of courage there. If you're watching this video clip, it means you've recognized that there's a problem and you've already taken a few significant steps towards resolving them. So the courage is there. As recovery advisors and facilitators, our job is to encourage you, to keep you in touch with that courage. And tap into that courage to maybe be the most honest you've ever been about yourself. To go in there, to start talking about what's in there, is a very scary prospect. You're going to experience a lot of fear and trepidation and skepticism and doubt. But self-honesty is key. If you're not willing to get honest with yourself, you might find that this process is going to be a lot harder than you anticipate. Understand that you will struggle, and it's okay. That's how you know step work is working, is when it hurts, when you start experiencing that roller coaster of emotion and pain, and you're probably going to want to run away. You're probably going to start finding excuses and reasons not to do it, and that's okay. That's actually a normal, healthy response to doing good step work. If you're able to drop it out of your intelligence and into your heart and start approaching it personally, it's going to hurt. Don't try and do it alone. Ask for help. Use your counselors, sponsors, use your group, use your recovery advisors. Stay connected. Recovery and growth is not going to happen in a vacuum or in isolation. It requires connection. It requires community. Okay? Connection this way, connection that way. Sometimes it's connection this way first, and we work towards connection that way. So step one is all about building a foundation. Starting with a solid foundation. And in order to do that, you need to build your step work program, your recovery program on three fundamental understandings of powerlessness, unmanageability, and insanity. You've got to prove to yourself what these three things mean in your life. Okay? This is critical stuff. You can't be vague here. Powerlessness loss of control, unmanageability, evidence of that loss of control, insanity. How do you behave to make what you do sound okay? An intellectual or philosophical understanding of these three things is not nearly enough. You've got to personalize it. And here's a controversial suggestion I'm going to make. Depending on what step working guide you're using, whether you're using one from eHab, probably you're going to end up looking at one of the NA or AA step working guides. I'm going to use the NA step working guide because that's the one I'm most familiar with. It's the step work that I did. I think I've looked at many different versions of step working guides, and I find that the NA step working guide is the best one. It asks the best questions. But the problem I have with it is the word disease. So my suggestion is to remove that word wherever you find it and replace it with my addiction. And I'll explain. If you look at the questions in the NA step working guide, the very first question is, what does the disease of addiction mean to me? And immediately it invites a philosophical answer. And philosophical answers aren't good enough. Now, if I replace it with my addiction, what does my addiction mean to me? That invites a much more personal answer. I can get much more honest and much more personal with that question. Okay? And you'll see this through the NA step working guide. So I'm not a big fan of the disease concept or the disease model of working with addictions. I'm going to say that outright. But that's me. If you're comfortable there, c'est la vie. But I'm not a big fan because I feel it takes away a lot of responsibility from you. And I feel it's a label. We don't need labels. We need freedom. Step work has always got to be very, very detailed about your thinking, about your behavior, about your intent, consequences, outcomes, feelings or lack of feelings. Okay? Especially about your intent. We don't want to look at our intent. We don't want to acknowledge that much of the time our intent was to be deceptive. Our intent was to lie, was to steal, was to manipulate, was to hurt, was to control. Okay? When we're in addict mode, when we're in using mode, it's a very powerful place. Paradoxically, they call it powerlessness. Powerlessness is full of power. Because you're going to end up behaving in ways you wouldn't normally behave. So the answers must be very detailed. Be very specific. Always try to include a detailed personal story that incorporates what the question or theme of questions is trying to show you. So you'll see the step ones are usually broken into sections. You'll have the denial section, the powerlessness section, the unmanageability section, the control section, the reservation section, etc. Okay, so read the questions and think about how you want to answer them. within the context of the question. So if it's in the section of denial, it's trying to get you to look at your denial. Do your best to meet the word count and avoid short answers. And again, the reason for this is to help you to get to a deeper level of honesty. If you're going to give short word answers, one word answers, short answers, you're not going to get into the detail. And the devil is in the details, or the feelings will always be in the details. That shame that this is trying to illuminate is going to be in the details. It's not going to be in a helicopter view or a narrative about your addiction. Commit to a time and specific days to do step work. Especially if you're doing it right and it's really hurting and you really don't want to do it, that's when that discipline counts the most. Here we have a blueprint. What happened? How did you feel then? How do you feel now? Reflecting back on what happened and how you felt then or didn't feel then. Be very specific about everything. Behavior, consequences, and outcomes. And feelings. Must include feelings. You've got to explore your feelings. You might not have had feelings at the time, but you've got feelings now, reflecting back on what you did then. You stole from your granny, you didn't care at the time. In fact, you were quite jubilant and elated because you knew you were going to be able to use. You knew that you were breaking her heart. You could see the emotion on her face. You didn't care because using was more important to you at the time. Later now, when you're doing step work and reflecting back on what you did to your granny, you can get in touch with that shame. I feel very ashamed of what I did. I feel gutted that I could behave in such a way. I know how much my granny loved me. Okay? So be very specific about everything. Now, the last slide is an assessment criteria for yourself. After you've done a batch of questions, use this as a means of checking yourself. Can you tick all of these boxes? If you can tick all of these boxes, then it's probably good step work. The first one is honesty. Was I really honest? Was I really honest about whatever that question was touching in me? Or did I evade the question by being honest about something else that was less painful, that I would get good feedback for when I present my step work to whoever? Or was I really honest? Content. Did I glamorize my addiction or my behavior, or was it realistic? Did I use my step work as an opportunity to brag about what a bad guy I was, or what a successful addict or drug dealer or whatever I was? Or was it realistic? Did I focus on the outcome and the consequence of the behavior rather than maybe the behavior itself? Examples. Did I include personal examples? Always try and include a personal example so you can answer the question and you say, for example, on this day, this is how it happened. Feelings. Did I express my feelings verbally? Feelings. Did I express my feelings physically? Sometimes we can't express them verbally because we don't know what they are. We're getting in touch with feelings maybe for the first time in a long time. They might come out physically. Don't resist that. An outward manifestation of inner healing is snot and tears. Did I meet the word count? Most questions in step work will have 150 to 300 word count. Do your best to meet those. You don't have to get them exactly right, but just avoid the smaller, shorter answers which are going to take you away from your feelings. Specific issues. Was there anything specific that brought emotion to me? Make a note. Maybe that's something that you could talk to your recovery advisor about. You can unpack further. Maybe he's going to give you or she's going to give you a targeted worksheet about that specific issue or something to read. So highlight specific issues. Did I notice any patterns of a particular behavior? Very important. Negative and destructive patterns of behavior, the ones that you recognize and start to identify, you can start breaking those, you can start changing those. Patterns of behavior that you don't recognize or see or acknowledge are going to stay the same. And if you're doing intellectual, vague or generalized step work, you're not going to see any patterns. Is there a sense of acknowledgement and acceptance of my addiction? So that's for you. That's a little inventory that you can use to check yourself with your step work. I will post something that you can download online. So that's a primer for the 12 steps. Next one is going to be, I'm going to start on step 1. It'll be 3 or 4 lectures, short lectures on step 1. I'm going to try and give a really robust unpacking of what step 1 is, what it means, what it requires, to help broaden your perception and understanding of step 1. And with a broader understanding of step 1, you'll very, very likely answer the questions better. Okay, till then, it's on out.